Let's bring in two of the smartest people in all of California politics for our panel tonight. Melanie Mason joins me now from LA. She's the California Bureau Chief for Politico. Mike Madrid is the co-founder of the Lincoln Project, founder of the Latino Working Class Project. He's live in Sacramento. Both of you were with us after the first debate, so we thought it would be fun to have you back for the second debate. And Melanie, let's start with you. One of the big storylines in this race in the last few weeks has been the sort of out-of-nowhere rise of Xavier Becerra, the former HHS secretary, former AG, former congressperson. He has been surging. And tonight, he took on a Republican that he probably would like to take on in the general election. Watch.
The first thing we have to do is stop Steve Hilton's daddy, who has endorsed him and said that's what we got to do, from becoming the next governor of the state of California. We need someone who's going to fight Donald Trump, not agree with him.
And we've had the same people in charge for 16 years now. And because it's such a disaster and such a high cost of living for everyone, and the highest poverty rate in the country, and the highest unemployment rate in the country, and the worst business climate, all these things going wrong, they can't do anything except blame Trump.
What do you think, Melanie? Did Becerra sort of do a good job? And talk about his strategy.
Well, look, if the takeaway from tonight's debate is that it was Xavier Becerra versus Steve Hilton, then it was a good night for Xavier Becerra, because I think what he wants to do is sort of take this momentum that he's been experiencing over the last few weeks and sort of cement in the mind of voters, like, yes, he is the Democratic frontrunner now. And so if he's able to square off against a Republican, perhaps give people a preview of what a November matchup could look like and not have to worry about attacks from his Democratic rivals. I mean, I think that puts him in a very good position. And so, yeah, I would say, Steve Hilton's daddy didn't exactly roll off the tongue, but it was clearly a planned sort of jab, because I think that was clearly the game plan tonight was, let's make this a D versus R debate and sort of ignore the other Democrats in the room. And the Democrats didn't really take too many punches at him, so he emerged relatively unscathed.
Because as we know, Mike, in California, there's the top two that emerge regardless of party. And historically, there has been an approach by Democrats to try to lift up a Republican because they would rather run against a Republican in the general election, where they would start off with a 15, 20-point advantage because there's just so many more Democrats. We haven't seen that much so far of that because the Democratic frontrunner hasn't emerged so far. Somebody who's spent more money than anybody is Tom Steyer, who's now spending negative ads against Xavier Becerra. Didn't really attack him on stage tonight. What did you make of Steyer's performance?
I'm not sure Steyer got accomplished what he wanted to accomplish. I think he's really got to cut out the feet underneath Xavier Becerra's rise. He's certainly spending tens of millions of dollars to do that on paid advertising. But if the goal, and I think the goal should have been to kind of take on Xavier directly and undermine him from a policy or political perspective, not only did he fail to do that, he didn't even try to do that. So I'm not too sure what the strategic objective was there. But moreover, I think he really needs to start positioning away from sort of just being this talking head, commercial, ubiquitous presence in California right now that seems to have hit kind of this ceiling. He seems to be stalled in the mid-teens rate. He's going to have to demonstrate a little bit more why he wants to be governor. And these debates provide that opportunity to show a little bit of personality, to be a little bit more human and more relatable, especially if you're a billionaire. And again, that didn't come across tonight, but you can never count out another $200 million, which is rumored to what he may be able or wanting and willing to spend. So there's still a long way in this race. I don't think this race changed tonight. The trajectory didn't change. We're just going to have to watch some of the polling over the course of the next few days to see if voters that were tuning in started deciding that this is the candidate they want to be with.
That is crazy to think about, the idea of another $200 million, because there haven't been enough ads from him. Meanwhile, there's this fight between the top two Republicans, Chad Bianco, the Riverside County Sheriff, and Steve Hilton, who has been backed by Donald Trump. What did you make of the two of them? Seems like they didn't go after each other at all.
No, it doesn't seem like they were really engaging with
Melanie. I'm sorry, I'll go to you, Melanie.
Yeah, sorry about that. I think that they weren't really engaging with the Democrats. Or I would say that the attacks did not seem very focused. I mean, Chad Bianco was sort of talking about Democrat policies writ large, but when it came into sort of engaging with individual Democrats, it seemed a little bit unfocused. Look, I think that we see the two lanes that these two Republicans have carved out for themselves. I think Chad Bianco really sort of appealing to the grassroots base. I think that Hilton was position himself as both, MAGA friendly, but maybe also appealing to more centrist Republicans as well. And they kept that up. But I think that you had Hilton really, again, going one-on-one in moments with Xavier Becerra did feel more like a general election debate, whereas Bianco was just sort of damning Democrats across the board.
And he seemed frustrated by the format. He wasn't the only
Yes.
one. A lot of times, Melanie, what really matters are viral moments, because not everybody watches this stuff live, but the amplification of one moment that could just stay with you and can define a race. Did anything like that happen tonight?
Nothing really popped for me. I'd be curious if Mike feels the same way. I will say that there was one Twitter clip that I have seen of Katie Porter sort of like bowing her head down on the dais in kind of frustration. Maybe that sort of expressed everybody's views. But yeah, if you're talking about a real sort of snappy quip that people could package into TikTok or Instagram videos, nothing really comes to mind for me.
And meanwhile, Mike, coming into tonight, Katie Porter, Matt Mahan, the mayor of San Jose, Antonio Villaraigosa, the former LA mayor, all behind in the polls, all needed something to shake up the race because the status quo isn't working for them. Do you think they did that? And if they didn't, what do they need to do in the next week? Because ballots go out next week.
That's exactly right. We have to remind ourselves that in California, we really have a voting month, and it starts in a week from today. Voters are more tuned in. You can see the polling, the numbers, even though it is still kind of spread out for a bunch of all these candidates, the actual numbers are starting to move up, which means voters are turning in and the lanes are actually beginning to consolidate. Katie Porter, I think, had some I think she had a pretty good night, actually. I think she had a better night tonight than she did in her first debate. I think some squaring off with the Republicans there, especially Chad Bianco. She seemed to have sort of a Kamala Harris moment talking to Mike Pence, saying, "Excuse me, I'm talking." I was waiting for her to throw another, kind of haymaker and throw that knockout punch. It never came, but I think she got the point across regardless. Antonio Villaraigosa, I think a lot of people were reminded that this is a candidate who's really challenging some of the Democratic base. That's been kind of a core argument. It was his argument when he ran in 2018. He had a good night. The challenge, I think, with Mahan is he's running literally in the same lane as Antonio Villaraigosa is, and that lane is in the single digits. It's just not a big lane. And even though he's now spending, as his campaign was saying, Steyer level money, they're not moving at all. Like the message that they've tried to run with is not resonant with Democrats right now. This kind of our party is failing, it's not working, is not getting the traction that I think that they had hoped for. Mahan needed a knockout punch tonight. He needed to really deliver. And I think any objective estimation would say that he's probably not going to move the needle, and he's simply running out of time.
And it's interesting, last word, Melanie, to you, this idea of running against the Democratic Party at a time when it seems that the party base is most focused on the idea of fighting Trump. And the current governor of California, who Matt Mahan has often run against, is very popular at the idea of pushing back on the president.
Look, I think that that's been perpetually the big question about this race is what are voters going to want? Do they want somebody who's going to position themselves as the one to take on Trump? Or do they want somebody who's going to say, look, we have a lot of problems back here in the state and we're going to take them on? And what I think is interesting is I've just seen consistently in polling throughout this race that people, at least Democratic voters, seem more concerned with this question about Trump. And so I do think that, yes, Matt Mahan has been trying to differentiate himself by saying, we can say that Trump is bad, but also focus on our problems back home. But I just don't think that that's speaking to what is really stirring Democratic voters right now.
Melanie Mason, Mike Madrid, thank you both. We really appreciate your perspective. You can watch the next debate for California governor right here on CNN next Tuesday, May 5th.